Hey guys, welcome back to Wentworth Life, the channel that brings you Wentworth. Now if this is your first time here guys, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And guys, it is absolutely friggin' boiling here in South Wales. It has been like non-stop really high temperatures for the past couple of days, so there might be a little bit of sweat. In today's video, I am going to be reviewing Wentworth Season 3, Episode 6, Evidence. Now, this is the episode where things take even more of a dark turn, if that's even possible. In the previous episode, Jody had finally told B and Frankie what Joan did to her in the slot, and she agreed to report it. Now, as soon as this episode begins, we are shown in little flashbacks of what Joan did to Jody while Jody is reporting it to Derek Channing, while also being accompanied by B. Smith. And as Jody is reporting all of this, Joan walks past Derek Channing's office and she has a little bit of a concerned look in her face. Derek tells Joan that Jody has made serious complaints against her and she's gone to the ombudsman and that it's gonna have to go before the board. Ooh. Now this is when Joan starts to get a little bit worried. Not many people stand up to Joan Ferguson, and Joan knows that B is 100% behind all of this. Joan tries to get Frankie to try and detach Jody from B, and in return Joan will write a glowing report for Frankie's parole hearing, but Frankie is having none of it. B and Frankie are both sticking with Jody, making sure that she is never alone until this board meeting, but you know, this is Joan Ferguson. It's not going to be that easy. One of my favourite moments in this episode is a scene between Joan and B alone in Joan's office, talking about how much of a gamble that this is what B and Jody are doing. And Joan makes it clear to B that they have no evidence, and they get up really close and personal at one point, and you can just see the hatred between B and Joan at this stage. Like, they just want to kick each other's asses, and I just love it. B is playing Joan at her own game, and Joan can't stand it. And also, when B does leave the office, Joan does this little neck twist thing, like, you know, like she's clicking her neck, and her eyes, they just totally change to the dark side of Joan Ferguson, who we all know. It was so intense, and I loved it. So the meeting is going ahead as planned, and B has agreed to be Jody's advocate for the meeting. However, things do take a very shocking turn when B is alone in a corridor doing some pickup work with the trolley. B looks up at one of the security cameras and she notices that one of them has been turned away from her. All of a sudden, a hand from behind B grabs her over the mouth and using something to knock her out, and she's then dragged away. Like, what is going on? Meanwhile, Jody is taken to this board meeting, expecting to see B there. Jody tells all these people what Joan did to her, and while it does seem to be going well for the most part, Vera ends up coming into the meeting and whispers something into Joan's ear. Joan then gets up and says that B. Smith will not be able to attend the meeting because she is incapacitated. Now, when I first saw this scene, I had no idea what this word meant. For a very split second there, I thought B had actually been killed off. I was like, what's going on? But what this actually really means is that B has been taken to the psych ward after a psychotic episode. Now, this completely changes the game when Jody starts to freak out and she then runs up to Joan apologising in front of all of these important people, saying that she didn't mean it, she's sorry, making it look like that she's just made this whole thing up. And Jody pretty much ends up going to the psych ward herself, and this completely clears Joan in the investigation. But you can see Derek Channing there just looking in the corner. He knows that everything that Jody has said was true, but there's not a bloody thing that he can do about it. Meanwhile, B wakes up in the psych ward, strapped to this bed, screaming out for help, and Oh, I tell you what, guys, it's a real bone-chilling scene. I don't know what it is, but I was so freaked out when I first watched this, and whenever I go back and rewatch it, it always gives me this horrible feeling of anxiety. What did happen to B between being knocked out by that unknown person to be put in the psych ward? Well, that isn't revealed until the next episode, so that will all be talked about in the next video. There is also a scene where Vera goes up to Channing after the meeting and she asks him, you know, did Joan, like, refuse to, you know, let the women through when they had the injection in her throat? And he says, yes, she did refuse. As we all know, guys, Vera had been given the information from a doctor that she had caught hepatitis C. So, what will this mean for Joan and Vera's relationship going forward? Will finds himself in more predicaments while he is having dinner at his house with Rose. Rose ends up going out into Will's yard to get some more wood for the fire, and she ends up discovering something, and she ends up calling out to Will, telling him to come outside. Now, as he goes out, they end up seeing an axe. I think it's an axe, and it's covered in blood. It's basically the murder weapon that killed Harry Smith. Now, Rose is freaking out, Will is freaking out. They both end up having a bit of an argument, and Will ends up shouting at her to leave, which really wasn't very nice, Will. Will then proceeds to chop up this weapon, and then the police end up arriving. Now, I have got to say, I was getting bored of the police, you know, completely, you know, turning up at Will's house all the time throughout season 3. I just found it a little bit annoying. Now, it was doing Will's head in, it was doing my head in, but they end up doing another search of Will's house while Will is having his food, and we see, well, you know, the audience sees the weapon burning in his fire pit. Now, at least part of it is burning, I believe. I don't know what he did with the other part, because I know that will come into play with the storyline later on, because Will ends up throwing it into the river or something, but he did put at least one piece of it into the fire. We ended up seeing Nash in this episode. He came to visit Doreen, and it was so lovely to see him. Just gotta say, Nash is very hot. Me and Peter both like Nash. They have a cute little visit together, and Nash, you know, he tells Doreen that he's looking for work and he's really excited for the baby to arrive, and it was just such a lush scene to watch. Liz continues to have a really bad time in this episode when Sophie ends up shouting at her in front of everyone, telling Liz that she is a lagger and an alcoholic and a drunk. I mean, didn't Sophie get arrested twice for drink driving and killing some guy? Just putting it out there. Pot kettle and all that. Anyway, Sophie ends up having a pep talk from B. Obviously, this happens before B is attacked by that guy, but anyway, Sophie agrees to go and make it up with her mum, but Liz gets a very odd surprise when she ends up finding a bottle of homebrew tucked underneath her pillow. And, oh dear me, the temptation is just too much for Liz, and she ends up drinking it. But who left the booze under the pillow? Boomer will not be happy when she finds out it's missing, but this does lead us on to a horrible scene where Sophie comes to Liz's cell to make things up with her, until Sophie realizes that Liz is pissed. And a huge row breaks out into the corridor. Frankie is there, and all of a sudden Frankie and Liz, they're there having this huge argument, and then Doreen tries to stop Liz and she ends up being pushed by Liz into the wall. Dear God. Thankfully, Doreen and Baby Bump are okay, but bloody hell, somebody wrap up Doreen into bubble wrap, please. A very drunk Liz then goes to shout something about Meg Jackson, but Frankie ends up pinning Liz up against the wall, telling Liz that she will kill her if she doesn't shut her gob. The whole argument is stopped by Bridget, who witnesses the whole thing. Bridget is not impressed with Frankie, and Frankie isn't happy either, and she ends up storming off. Now, as I said in my last video, I really don't like seeing Frankie and Liz fighting like this. Now, the first time I was watching season 3, chemistry. I just wanted them to kiss and make up, and I know they do eventually do later on in the season, but I didn't know that at the first time when I was watching season 3. Just to wrap things up, before we see that horrible scene of B strapped to the bed right at the end of the episode, Fletcher spots a man outside in the prison car park who ends up dropping his car keys. Now, Fletcher notices and he picks it up for this guy, and Fletcher ends up just looking at him as he hands the keys back, and the other guy looks back and asks Fletcher, is he alright? And Fletcher is like, yeah, and ends up walking off. Now, of course, as we all know, this man is Nils Jasper, and he is the man who ran down Fletcher back in season 2, and all of this is going to start coming back to Fletcher very, very soon. So, another jam-packed, juicy episode with so much going on. So many mysteries of who killed Harry Smith. I mean, who keeps on setting up Will? Is it Joan? Is it CRAIGz? Is it bloody whoever? I don't know. Who is planting booze underneath Liz's pillow? This episode marked the halfway mark of season 3, and so much has happened, but there is still so much more to come, and this is why season 3 is definitely rated as one of the best seasons. And I mean one of, now guys, not the best, but one of the best seasons of Wentworth ever by a lot of fans. My favourite moment in this episode is definitely that scene between Joan and B in the governor's office, and my least favourite moment is the bit where Jody is scratching her arm, and she, the bit when she's freaking out in the meeting. Oh, it always gives me shivers, and not in a good way whenever I watch it. But now it's time to hear some of your lovely comments, you lovely people. I want to know what you thought of this episode when you first watched it. Were you horrified by that cliffhanger ending of B strapped to the bed? Let me know everything in the comments box below. Okay then guys, well, thank you all for watching today's video. Be sure to like, share and subscribe to the channel. Stay safe out there guys, and I will see you all again very, very soon.